RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by Pro Athlete Supplementation. Check them out at pas-nutrition.co.uk for all your supplementation needs. And don't forget that subscribers to the Rugby Renegade program get a 40% discount on retail prices. Yes, welcome back to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. My name's Jamie Bain and today I interview John Noonan, performance coach who's got a history in league, union and football. Tons of experiences, and he really shares that with us today. So give it a listen and let us know what you think. Hi John, welcome to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. Great to have you on. Why don't we start by you just telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning, and some of the teams and athletes you've worked with.
Sure. Yeah. Hi. Thanks for having us on. It's massively appreciate taking out some time to have a little chat too. So, my background, I guess, for one word, it would be very varied. First full-time role I had came after an undergrad, and that was in 2004. Yeah, 2004. A couple of voluntary roles, but then I think 2007 was probably the main first one that was in football. So, because the first part of my career was in football, championship football, premiership football, and then from there, I was in a phenomenal environment, which was Chelsea. Did about 14, 15 months there, and it was a really exciting but quite a challenging point as well in my career because, I'd kind of done the UKSCA at that point, had a really strong insight into what S&C looked like at the time, and in football, as we all know, it perhaps doesn't look like you first imagine when you walk in as an S&C coach. I think now, conventionally practice has moved on a great deal, but certainly back then it was more water bottles, warm-ups, piss pots, heart rate monitors, which was fine, but it didn't overly excite me at the time, despite the environment I was in. And don't get me wrong, I worked with some great people, but by doing so, I guess it provided me with a challenge to think, well, you could stay in this space and have a fantastic career, but what is it you really want from the role? And for me, it was to get my hands dirty a little bit more as a strength coach, perhaps along with the conditioning and the other aspects of being a coach, and that's where I made the decision to leave and go into rugby and spent 4 great years at Leeds Carnegie Rugby Club, now Yorkshire Carnegie, 2 years in the academy, and then 2 years heading up the first team with a really special group of people, of whom I'm still in touch with now. And I know you have good contacts and friends with Rob Parkinson, and there's some fantastic people that have come from that. And we're a really good group of mates. So I think after that, during that tenure, I was introduced to randomly a border cross athlete, snowboard cross athlete, a female GB athlete, and as a bit of a favour started doing some work with her, which turned into eventually a full-time role, which was hybrided with some alpine skiing, a touch of ski cross, and that was with the British Ski Snowboard Association. So it was definitely something on my agenda to try and work with an Olympic team. So that was exciting and fun, and that actually just transitioned because the creation of a new freestyle GB Park and Pike team. So we had a brand new program, brand new team and group of people came together working alongside UK Sport to design and deliver a world-class plan for the Sochi 2014 Winter Olympic Games. And that was fantastic, and actually was a hybrid role again with a PhD at the time, which sadly hadn't finished. And I know I've got a few colleagues out there who have tried and perhaps haven't got it over the line at some stage, but it then turned into an MPhil, and the idea of it was that there's a real void of quality evidence in the area of strength and conditioning for some really exciting extreme sport athletes. So the main aim initially was to do a taxonomy and do an assessment of what are the critical demands of the sport, and that was a really good challenge, and trying to take some more laboratory rigorous assessments in a really challenging untrodden path of how do you apply that in the real world. Snow, they're really free-spirited people. They're not from a background which is maybe a little bit more formal as a training environment, or the relationships you have with athletes that recognize what conventional training is with strength work and things like that. So it was a really good challenge and a really exciting time. That turned into an MPhil, which I finally submitted about 5 years later. After about 2 to 3 years in that role, an opportunity to go into Huddersfield Giants Rugby League presented itself, so stepped into that, and some really good challenges actually, and didn't quite go the direction that I intended, and actually I left at the end of the first season there, but nonetheless it was a good ride. And then from there went into Everton Football Club, headed up the S&C program in the academy, and I was there for about 3 years until at this point. And I work for I work for myself actually. So in February of this year, took the plunge. Something I thought about for a couple of years, just to try and catch a bit more ownership of my own time, projects that I was engaging in, and really test myself in the space of self-employment with teams and athletes, and alongside some private stuff too. So I've been doing that since February of this year. So learning some hard lessons, but it's an exciting transition nonetheless. And trying to juggle, been a dad to 2 girls and a wife as well. So trying to win on all fronts, which is exciting.
That's cool. And yeah, we'll touch more about your self-employed work later. But just if you wouldn't mind going into a bit more detail about your work in ski and snowboard, and what you've kind of taken from that and what you can apply to your work nowadays. But also just I always think it's interesting speaking to different sports, because often I'm in the sort of rugby and team sports bubble and don't really mingle with other people. What are the key things in that sport that you can take into other environments?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something I was challenged on a lot by my peer group of what are you doing that for? How does the skill set that you've captured to really worked in? Or certainly, I couldn't lean on anyone to find out what were some of the common practices. And look, I think as a sport, I tried not to get overwrought by the fact that I didn't really know what I was doing, and I made no excuses that I had no idea about the sport. I'd skied a little bit earlier on in school, but I couldn't brag to be of any quality, or I couldn't do anything that I might relate in any way to a background in it. So for me, it was getting to understand the people. As a bloke, could I relate as a person first and foremost? I think that was the biggest challenge, because they are, free-spirited, adrenaline, off-the-wall junkies. They are lovely people, but they're, like I said before, that they're not from conventional practice or conventional training and competition. Largely, the program that they operate in is their program. It's very athlete-led, athlete-centered, which was, again, unique for me working in an individual sport. I assume because they're all part of the same team that an aspect of training and competition was about progressing each other. And actually, to an extent, some of it is through some peer-to-peer experiences and competition that it generates. But they're not competing for a jersey with each other. It's can they maximise their own performances, and that was quite unique coming from only team sport practice. So that definitely challenged my approach to each individual. And actually, even though they're very different as a makeup and a person, they still had quite a large diversity in their needs and requirements as far as what they're into as people. Some were really engaged in strength work, and that was really easy as a transition. Others weren't, and thus you had to work really, really hard on getting buy-in, high compliance, high adherence to training and injury prevention work that you knew would help them, but they had never had a relationship with in the past. I think my entry actually was I met a guy called Jamie Nichols, who was a male slopestyle rider. He did really well, and he ended up getting a 6th best male result at slopestyle Winter Olympics in 2014. Really exciting talent, but I'd kind of been primed that he wasn't into strength work, but yet they identified from looking at him as an athlete, and he had a bit of an injury risk at the time, that he really needed it. And so they don't set that up for you. You've got to go in and really convince these people that they need to try and take notice, or where possible, drip feed some of the more valued aspects of training and preparation to being better on the snow every day. So it was truly operating an athlete-centered model, and from that it was it was trying not to be too oppressive and directive with the way I coached, but rather putting it in their terms and being very open-ended and being prepared to sort of go in directions that I probably didn't go in before. But I think for me, with all the environments that I've been in, I would say that the first approach I've gone in with is just be a really good listener. You've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. So I think for me to have an effect on an environment or a group of people that can't relate to me at all, people only buy into those who they know, like, and trust. And trust was definitely high on my agenda as far as building effective relationships, and then for them to understand that I'm there to help rather than direct and be an authoritative coach, which, I've made that mistake early in my career, being very dictatorial, if you like, as coaches in your title. So you need to act that way as a coach. And for me, it really isn't about that. It's a people business, and it's all about people relationships. So, yeah, relationships and trust were definitely high on that. And there's some really lovely people, but it kept me, I think, very grounded and humbled about exactly what my value was, because I was just an S&C coach. They hadn't had one before. They couldn't put a value on that. So, I was prepared to go at their pace.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's some great advice in there, John. Like especially the listening and the fact that kind of straight away you've gone into the fact it's the relationship with the coach, with the athletes, rather than just it's the they need strong legs for whatever it might be. It's all about the buy-in, and I think especially in rugby where
right.
the strength and conditioning side of things, that there's a big buy-in already from the players. A few stragglers, ignore those, but the majority of players buy into it quite easily. So for you to have that experience to go to a sport where it's completely brand new to them, in your example, that must have been a massive thing for you to develop, and then bring that into when you go back to rugby as well. So let's touch on as you said about moving into self-employment as you did February this year, because we get a lot of S&C coaches listening to the podcast, and I guess although the industry's growing massively, there's still not a huge amount of jobs, but there's a lot of people coming out with uni degrees and competing for jobs. And we were kind of talking off air about it before, and kind of saying that you kind of think, there's only a few teams and a few jobs, but what's your experience moving into kind of commercial industry and doing your own work?
Yeah, listen, that's a really interesting topic for me at the moment. I mean, one of the initiatives that I have is a coach mentorship program, and that really wasn't by design. It wasn't something that when I left my full-time role I thought I'm going to set up a mentorship, because it just kind of happened, and that came off the back of a couple of coaches and friends that I knew who'd said, listen, would you mentor me? But could we set this up seriously where we both dedicate time and a process to this? And then as a byproduct, I kind of created a structure, and now there's a mentorship of 8 coaches on there who I work with very closely, and the idea that it's very personal and that it's aligned exactly to what coaches need, be it knowledge, skills, or if I can transfer some of my experience and key lessons learned so that people can fast track or add more impact to their environment. But not to get lost with that, one of the things I'm doing at the moment is I'm trying to get a blog going, and with life getting in the way, it can be a challenge to be consistent. But one of the things I'm writing about at the minute is how to have impact in a crowded marketplace or crowded environment. And I think that's key. Like you just alluded to there's a high supply of coaches, perhaps a lesser demand for jobs. I think certainly in the professional sector. I mean, for me, it definitely was working in the professional sector that really got me going. And there's an aspect that maybe you're indoctrinated to thinking about athletes, high-end performance. You want to test your ability against elites. And, sadly not everyone has that opportunity. And I think probably if I started again, I might not have had the amount of, or the depth of experience that I've got within pro sport because of the size of the competition now. And yeah, it's a factor, but I don't think it is a limiting factor. I think it comes back to how you define your value. Can you market your value? There was a really interesting thread recently. I don't know if you saw it. It was with Stuart McMillan, and I think a couple of other gents had jumped on there, like Brett Bartholomew, Eric Cressy, and some really interesting comments were made. And at the moment, I think the media attention around jobs or pay for jobs, it's rife. and we certainly don't mind sharing our opinion about that, do we, on Twitter, and that's fine. That's I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if you look at, for instance, the state of the industry survey that was done by the UKSCA in 2016, that clearly shows that while the majority of coaches, I think thinking about now, are working in the professional sector, or those who at least gave feedback for the survey, I should say, were working in the professional sector. And then it looked at what people's remuneration was against their level of experience, their skill sets and qualities. And unsurprisingly, I think if you had 5 years experience or less, you could expect to receive a salary of anywhere from £0 to £20,000. And yet, when a job role comes out at the moment, that might be for £15,000 or £15,000 to £20,000. There's uproar, and I feels frustration. We don't go to university and invest thousands, and of course, university fees are increasing. And I think I was one of the last ones who fortunately paid highs of £3,000 for a. But I think it's extortionate now, and the industry has grown. I think there's a higher amount of coaches turning to formal education. I mean, did some research. I think in 2004, when the industry was established, there was one S&C course, specific S&C, a higher education course, and I think that was Edinburgh University. That was a master's, and now, do the math for me. So many years on, there are 23 master's courses and 22 undergraduate specific S&C courses. So I think there's a steady growth, and it's been exponential. And, we're definitely pumping out students that are capable, have got good skill sets, and a lot of them have great experience. But if you're in a crowded market, how do you differentiate what your qualities, or how do you get out what your value? Not be a salesman, but have you really thought about that when you get to interview? I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it. There are umpteen CVs that come through the door that, you've got all the natural requisites that we want, but what is the defining factor that means you make the shortlist or not? If you're a coach, and I want 5 years experience ideally because of the nature of the role or the environment that you come into, I might be looking for certain skills and attributes. You might have a degree, fantastic, you've ticked all the boxes, but you're not going to interview 100 people. So how do you stand out to be that top 10 or that top 5? And then for me, it's three things. You've got to define what your value is, really critically assess where you are and what is your point of difference, and what do you have to offer that might be unique, or perhaps your perception is different or interesting that someone else doesn't have. Have you got case studies of your work that you can demonstrate that provide context to, I've developed a strength training program at an academy, and this is the impact that it's had. Fantastic, show me. Because that's the point of difference that will help me identify what your value is. And then, of course, you need to grow your value. And I think after you've done university, and perhaps, this isn't a plug, but perhaps one of the nice things or something that I'm trying to do with the mentorship is to provide people with a strategy and a framework that we co-create, that people can then align to what they need to jump the gate, to jump the next hurdle, if that indeed is a big obstacle. And not everybody needs that, don't get me wrong, but there are certain people, and I was one of them at the time, that had the requisites, but until I got a decent mentor or called on a few peers and friends, I don't know about you, Jamie, but it can be difficult, when you go to a conference and the energy is high, people are pushing for pro sport roles, everyone's getting excited about the elite presentations, and it's great, you go home, read some articles, but then what? Where do you take that learning or that information? If you're going to engage, I think, in experiences now or learning opportunities, it's got to go somewhere. It's got to provide you with some value in return, however you apply that. And I think strategically, you've got to apply it in a way that is well thought out and considered. It can't just be you go to a conference and there's networking and other things, but what are you doing with that? And I think after you grow your value and you identify where perhaps you're lacking and where the areas that you can grow to have a bigger profile or an all-round profile, then it's about communicating the value, like I said, and I think truly figuring out if you've defined it well enough and you've shown that you've grown aspects of your value align with the direction you want to take your career in. And I didn't know for a long time, and still hope to to an extent of where I want to go ultimately, but you've got to be able to articulate and communicate that effectively. And because people can tell when you get to interview if they're a really, really astute, really considered person who's seriously thought about their skill set and how it aligns with an environment, and that they can identify their skills and match it to the environment that I'm offering a job for example. So I'm offering there a little bit, but hopefully you get the gist.
No, yeah, tons of information. I think you're right, and often it's quite hard to kind of figure out your skill set or what you're lacking in, and that's, for me personally, that's been a big thing where mentors have come in and been able to help kind of guide you in the right directions. So I guess, is that kind of what you're touching on as well?
Yeah. I think so. I don't think it. I'm not talking about some taboo things or doing something that other people aren't. But sorry, I've just lost the light in the car, and yeah, I'm actually in the car having this call with you because I've got two young girls under the age of 3 inside, and it's bedlam. So this is the quietest place I could do this. But I think so. If you fundamentally, you need to identify what you enjoy and what fulfills you. And like me at the time, I gave the example before, I stepped away from football. And to me, it's less about the sport, but more about the quality of the environment, the quality, or the opportunity, should I say, to deliver things that I'm interested in, or grow aspects of training and provide it in an environment that meets my ambition. And working, in international football, but anyway, that isn't interested in developing athletes with evidence-based practice or practice-based evidence in mind. Always, I think if we invest the amount of hours that we do in developing our philosophies of practice, when you go to work or you go to an environment that isn't interested in getting better, right? Reviewing strategies, developing strategies, and moving the needle forward, then for me personally, that's not very exciting. So, what's my value against that? Well, I'm very ambitious. So, what does that look like in terms of the CV? How does your CV represent that? Where have you been, and what have you done with that ambition? How have you grown your philosophy, your practice, your skill set? And can you articulate that in a manner that links to what someone wants from a coach or a role, and that therefore is an employable attribute. So in a roundabout way, I think if people can differentiate what they've learned from the journey that they've been on, and many people on the same journey, the same path, but yet articulate that in a manner that suits or demonstrates that they've thought about how it applies to the environment they want to go to, that's exactly what we should be looking for.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, tons of good information there. Now, this is a question we ask all the guests on the podcast, and it's: what is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to strength and conditioning?
That's a hell of a question. Well, if I think back to the experience I had in Leeds, and I just feel that it was probably that players didn't. A real general one, but they probably didn't respect the power of recovery enough. I think certainly in Union, the lads were so hungry and eager for athletic development, physical development, strength, size, that they probably didn't balance training and stress balance enough, the training recovery balance enough. So effectively you were diminishing any or that real rich adaptation response from strength training, and negating that by training again and not maximising recovery between sessions or after pitch sessions. And then I think it takes time through education, right, for guys to see and understand that they can make more progress with a minimum dose response sometimes, if they manage the workloads effectively. But I think for me it was that as under appreciating and under maximising recovery in those environments. Yeah.
Yeah,
quite
definitely.
general, but yeah.
No, look, that's something we've heard quite a bit, and I think players don't understand fitness fatigue and general adaptation syndrome or super compensation. They just think the more I do, the better, and they don't understand that you create that fatigue.
Yep.
You need to recover from it and adapt to a certain extent, then train. But they just try and train and train and train. Yeah, you see it a lot with players, and it's often you talk about the different personalities of players. You get some players who don't really like the strength and conditioning side of it, and then others who love it and go the wrong way by doing too much of it, and like you say, not getting the recovery and not getting those adaptations. So it's definitely a good point. So talk about rugby specifically. We know the game of rugby, it's such a chaotic environment. How do you sort of approach preparing your athletes for any eventuality in the game, and so they're robust from injury?
Yeah, I think that's the holy grail, isn't it? Really. So, I definitely would throughout working rugby teams be thinking, well, number one, I want to reduce injury incidents or risk of injury first, and then kind of ensure performance second. I mean, for me, over time, it kind of shifts sometimes with performance first, because I think ultimately you're there to help teams win and be successful, but sometimes that, again, I think can emphasise the importance of getting a good handle on what your peer group above you or management is really looking for. Are they looking to reduce? Is your role there to reduce injury, not as just an injury S&C or injury prevention coach? Does your program basically reflect what is the key goal, the key focus of that environment? And obviously those two things are synonymous in many environments. But for me, I think if we're talking physically, I think the best proactive approach is to periodise where possible, but have quite a fluid and a lucid periodisation model. I think people refer to that as agile periodisation these days. It was to prepare players for what are the worst case scenarios on the pitch. So, looking at some of the research from Tim Gabbett and looking at the most intense periods of matches I think it's in 3 to 4 minute windows, isn't it? And looking at what are the relative movement demands on these players from tackle, reload, jackal, reload, sprint. I think you have to remind me, Jamie, I've been out of the rugby a little bit, but I think more than three high intensity efforts within 21 seconds or something. But are you exposing players to that in training? I think is the first question. Have you reviewed what are the most intense scenarios, worst case scenarios in competition, and have you prepared them for it? But also, have you attached some accountability or a performance standard to that? So one of the things we did in England, and it wasn't necessarily my idea, but at Leeds, Mike Ford from England came in at the time, and we would stress test certain drills. So just looking at pitch conditioning, we would have instances where we would pre-fatigue a small-sided game, for instance, and it might be an overload attack type game, so a really quick ball in hand, aggressive running game. But prior to that, forwards that we might pre-fatigue with repeat tackle shield hits or a scrum prior to that, before they would do the running game. At the same time, the backs will be doing repeat shuttles or repeat sprint efforts and exposing them to that nature of their role, and then going to a small-sided game, really overload the attack and defence, and then we'd repeat back again and go back into another under fatigue, can you complete skill and task effectively? So, again, it could be hitting tackle shots for the forwards or rucking, and then it could have been, again, repeat shuttle or longer distance sprints for the backs. And that we'd stress test this and put outcomes on the small-sided games. So it wasn't just a case of, boys, here you go, there's 3 or 4 minutes, do what you can. It was, right, what do we think is suitable as a playing group at the moment? What would you be happy with in terms of try scored or the scoreline at the end of that small-sided game? And so it gave the attack and it gave the defence a working objective, so that it meant more than just playing a 4-minute game of rugby. So nothing too technical, but it put accountability and a challenge on the playing group, so that their standards, even under fatigue, like in competition, were under pressure. And then, of course, if they didn't meet what they felt was an appropriate goal or objective. At the end of it, there was a consequence, and largely the consequence was, me getting my whistle out, or the boys doing some running or hits again. But it put a greater precedent on the quality and standard of practice. And I don't know a great deal about the England rugby environment, but I've got some close friends and peers who've worked in that group, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I think Eddie Jones possibly introduced. If I'm generalising a little bit, when he first came in, it was to stress test the intense nature of gameplay, of ball in hand rugby, so that execution meant something in practice, and that people executed under fatigue, high skill, but had really good outcomes competitively, and thus were more able to technically reproduce that in competition in international rugby. So for us, it created a real standard of practice in the playing group. There was definitely a more acute awareness of, right, training means something. And rugby union boys, they don't take too much to get over it, do they? But it definitely set a precedent that we're not just training for training's sake or to get fit or to improve our handling skills. It meant something. It had to have tangible outcomes, and largely where we could, we might align that to who the playing group were at the weekend, or the competition that we faced. So yeah, just one example. I think exposing them to what are the realistic demands, and stress test that where you can. So psychologically, there's all those aspects that come into the playing as well. And then I think in terms of creating what might be, I guess considered a robust player, it was to ensure that, for us at the time, the playing group that I was with, that strength was king. We weren't necessarily as recruited a big group at the time. I think that changed in our second year. We definitely did recruit some bigger, heavier players, but it was to make sure that we exposed our players to a good dosing of strength work concurrently throughout the year. We would do conjugate sequencing, so we'd frame undulating mesocycle blocks around competition periods. We'd look to peak at least 3 times a season, and we try and prepare the group for what might be a congested period of fixtures that we knew we needed to win for competition placing, or what might be rivals and so forth, and we would anchor development and then unloading phases around those periods, but ensured that we never kind of stagnated in our strength work, or there were long windows where we weren't chasing athletic development. I think the idea of just doing maintenance work in season, I think it's dead, and I think that's been probably considered for a while. But for us and the coaching group that I worked with at the time, they were very comfortable with the knowledge, as were the players, that actually we want to try and finish the year as strong and athletic as possible, rather than just being happy with where they finished at the end of pre-season.
Yeah, you basically answered my next question on periodising training in season.
Right, I knew you had
and yeah, I mean, but going back to your example for the stress test, I think that's great. You've got kind of 3 things. You've got the competition. You've got the the standardisation of making sure it's based on some sort of rugby outcome, and the accountability if they don't hit it. There's extra work after that, because essentially that's what happens in a game. If you don't hit those good standards in a game, you're kind of punished for it, aren't you? So I really like that, and it sounds like you had really good buy-in from the players. And I haven't visited the England camp since Eddie's been there, but everything you hear is that it's that intensity based on kind of their metrics from they see in games, or high level international play. And I think the main thing you said there for robust is you've got to hit that intensity. So that's great to hear. And in terms of periodisation, it's one of my pet hates is we're in season now, it's just maintenance. You can't do that. And like you said, there's no point being in great shape after pre-season. No one ever wins anything in September, do they? Apart from maybe the Sevens.
Absolutely.
But you want to be as powerful and as physical as you can come the end of the season. And usually it's that team that is, they're the team that wins the trophy at the end. So yeah, some great points there.
Yeah.
The next question, we've kind of touched on bits, talking about the strength and conditioning industry as a whole, and it's totally up to you how you go this. But if you change one thing about the S&C industry, what would it be?
One thing. So I think think potentially one of the things, so if we're talking about working conditions or working environment, I know that sometimes parallels have been drawn to S&C roles against medical roles, and maybe how certain medical positions, even in academies, potentially are salary protected or maybe are matched with what people feel is a more fitting starting salary standard. Obviously one of the things that those guys have done there is made their certification chartered, which I think helps. And obviously there's a medical legal requirement for clubs to employ medical staff, not necessarily S&C staff.
Yeah.
But potentially, I know the UKC are moving toward a chartered certification anyway, which naturally I think will help and put a greater precedent on the importance of hiring a quality S&C coach with a certification. Not that it's essential, but I think it's a mark of practice and ability. So I think that will certainly help, and perhaps it'll help the field distinguish again from having a point of difference as someone who perhaps has prepared themselves to be more elite versus those who, there's nothing wrong with it, and the aspects that I'm doing right now, working in private practice, is absolutely fine. And then I think I've really, really enjoyed the journey, and I certainly wouldn't change anything about the journey that I've had. And I think that, looking at, again, the job market, people are now doing a better idea of keeping hold of, respecting internships, creating paid internships, creating paid, well-structured opportunities for younger coaches to come in, flourish and develop. That's absolutely what we should be doing. So perhaps if there's anything, unpaid internships is definitely not okay in my book. Certainly if you're going to ask someone to come and work for 30 hours plus a week. Sadly, I think there, for different reasons, there are a number of people perhaps who still do that. And no disrespect to them at all. My career, I'd been there, but that was common consensus then. You just did it. It was voluntary. I think I was part-time, 25 hours a week. I think for me at the time, it was a necessary evil to learn, make mistakes, and then get a foot in the door later. And there's still a lot of value in doing that. And I'm not saying that you should turn down opportunities just because they're free. There are some great opportunities, providing that perhaps maybe if that isn't met with monetary returns, you're given, in-house CPD, you're given structure to develop, let's say, your certification or your preparation for, let's say, UKCA or whatever certification that you're doing at the time. So something is at least valued as a return for the time given up by someone else. And then lastly, just I think it's probably more of a media thing than personalities or individuals. But I think I was quite into checking out Twitter every day a few years back, and now I'm probably looking at less and less, just because I don't think we sometimes do ourselves that many favours of being a bit brash with some of our behaviour and so how we share some of our views. And look, everyone to themselves. I'm just not someone who wants to get into a lot of conflict for no real reason. Respect that there are some challenging things abreast at the moment in the industry, and people are certainly trying to move toward addressing those, be it employee standards, be it how the UKCA perhaps are trying to educate employers who want to engage with the UKCA. But I think perhaps sometimes it doesn't hurt to keep dirty laundry out of public and maybe save your professional image a little bit. But that's just my opinion.
Cool. So again, you've kind of covered this a little bit in some of the previous questions, but what advice would you give to upcoming strength coaches?
Yeah, so, well, if I was to add anything else to what I said before, so if you're going to try and distinguish or differentiate who you are, what you do, and how it might be better than someone you're interviewing against for an S&C role, I would say that you probably need to do a number of key things about the whole job application. And to me, I always kind of looked at that as a job in itself. I don't know about you. I've been through making errors of dishing out multiple CVs with dear sir, madam, and it was a carbon copy cover letter for every single role that I went for. Unsurprisingly, wasn't so successful with those. I know that's been said by other people too, but I think in this day and age, because the competition is so large, you do have to, I think, put a bit of time and effort into thinking about who you're writing to. Have you taken the time to do some research about the role, the environment, the club that you're looking to work for? It doesn't hurt to try and certainly contact these people prior to the interview. I'm still astonished by the amount of people who just put in a cold application and hope that it's enough. I don't think it is enough. I mentioned before that people will hire and want to work with those who they know, like, and trust. I certainly have hired people based on a relationship to an extent that I had with that person, because I knew they were of worth, I knew they were of value. So, in order to get yourself in the door beyond that shortlist, so you can get in front of somebody, and many people can show their value, I think, when they get in front of someone else. But what are you prepared to do, and can you do it professionally, that will help you jump onto that shortlist and do so quite convincingly? And that's the key. And I think everything else being equal, when you get to interview, you get to practical assessment, whatever the hiring process is, generally people at that point will show their worth, and experience, quality, nerves come through. But taking the time to really do your homework and research on the environment, and certainly the lead of the environment or the head of the environment, take some time to look at their background, if they've done research, where they've been. So some way, if you can, you look to align some of your thoughts or your reading or your experience with things that they might be interested in. If you're going to go for a rugby role, you need to, yes, have a really strong handle on the strength and power research, the conditioning literature, look at the key demands of rugby, but then look at some of the innovation that might be happening around the environment. Look at the environment you're going to work for. What technology do they have? If you can find out prior to, make sure that you've at least done some reading, or you can demonstrate and show some cases that you have with some of the more progressive sports science technologies that are used right now. I mean, force plate software is massive, and it's growing at a real speed, isn't it? Or velocity-based training assessments and training. We need to be abreast with this information, and not that it can be the defining factor in someone getting hired, but again, when the market is perhaps as saturated as it is with folks with like-for-like experience, education, and accreditation, what you know and how you articulate what you know in a manner that fits a need or solves a problem for an organisation is what it's going to come down to. And then I think, probably off the back of that, I think, people buy, or should I say, people hire those who can offer an insight or solve problems that an organisation or a group have. Yeah. Right? So, generally speaking, I'm sure you've done, I know I have, when you go into advert, you've got an idea of what you want to see already. And generally speaking, a hint of that will be on the job application. What they're really looking for is a personal quality. What they really want is a skill set. So do your diligence on that. I used to study that job application hard and make sure that I nailed the core points that jumped out at me from that job advert on the cover letter, and I built my CV to fit that. Probably chopped off some things from my CV and then blended it to fit, what a pro environment might want to see. I wouldn't put sometimes voluntary roles on there. I wouldn't put what my grades were at school or college, because it isn't relevant.
Yeah.
It needs to be punchy, effective, and like I say, aligned to the advert, to the job, to the organisation. So, yeah, I think in short, as much research as possible. Really put some conscious thought into the whole approach, the job advert, the application, the interviewing, and then just try and be as personable as possible and make sure that you do a really good job in the communication and the relationships department, because I think for me that's always the strongest quality I look for in someone.
Yeah, I think definitely research is great piece of advice, and I think also you do your research about the club or team you're interviewing with. That'll kind of give you questions to ask. I always think when I'm interviewing someone, if they come back at me with some decent questions, that always paints them in a better light. And also, anyone I've been advising, going to interview, I've always said, it's an interview for you as well, to kind of see if you like the environment, you get a good vibe from it. But also, if worst case, you're unsuccessful at getting the role, worst case, you've still got an opportunity to, assuming a good environment where you can pick their brains and learn a little bit from them. So next time you go to an interview, you're in a better stand. And also it's building that network. If you come across well in that interview, they might know someone else that you're interviewing later on. You never know. It's just putting your best foot forward and showing that you've. Because I think anyone who's interviewed someone and realised they've put a lot of research into it, they're always impressed. So so great bit of advice there.
That's great advice. That's good.
And then any books or anything. It doesn't have to be S&C related. It might be we've had some quite out of the box ones. Any books that you'd recommend to strength coaches? Yeah,
so the ones that possibly jump out at me, and I've just gone over the book by Daniel Priestley, Key Person Influence again. Quite topical.
I've read that,
me at the moment in self-employment, right? And that's a phenomenal resource. Alongside that, legacy. I'm sure many people have mentioned that on your podcast, but that definitely sort of lit my taste buds with ambition and what I thought of what a high performing or high valued environment should look like. And probably a left field one, but Crucial Conversations. I forget the author, but if you spend enough time in pro sport or in any environment, it can be at home sometimes that there is conflicts and conscious conflict, and being able to understand your mindset and your behaviours in conflict, and then navigate that to get a good outcome from conflict with a player or with the staff or a group of people that you perhaps work with. It definitely puts you in good stead, because you're always going to get challenged, and sometimes it's personal, sometimes can be, or the way we perceive it. But I think if you've got, at least how to weather conflict, then that's sometimes are the more critical, more important moments of your role that can kind of define a direction with a playing group or your relationship with someone that is a real influencer where you work. So there's not. I like that sort of stuff. I'd say they're sort of three core ones as well. Score Takes Care of Itself, another belter of a book. They're the few.
Oh, cool. I would definitely check those out. And lastly, just to wrap up, John, where can people learn more about you?
I'm on media as within Instagram and Twitter as John_M_Noonan. I've got a website as well, noonanperformance.com. They're the probably core places. Yeah.
Cool, and we will of course share links to those in the show notes. But lastly, really, really good chatting with you. Thanks so much for sharing all that. Some great advice there, and tons of good information. Really appreciate you coming on. Thanks, and all the best for the future.
Great. Yeah, listen, thanks for your time. Great to chat. Thank you, Jamie.
Cheers, John. Yes, thank you, John, for coming on and taking the time to talk to us. Tons of great information there. Hopefully you found that helpful. If you did, please share it with anyone who you think it will help. And of course, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Tons more podcasts coming, so please subscribe to us on SoundCloud, TuneIn, Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, whatever you use for your podcasts. And of course, give us a 5-star review, because there's more coming, so stay tuned.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade Podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.